Pokemon Legends ZA speedruns have been developing at an insanely blistering pace, to the point where 7 different versions of the speedrun route have been published since the game was released about 2 to 3 weeks ago. And each time a new route was created, certain Pokemon that don't seem super great on the surface, like Vanillite, Flabebe, Beedrill, or Phantom, managed to take the spotlight by becoming a really niche but incredibly creative solution for plowing through parts of the game's story. But these unique usage cases haven't stopped at just Pokemon, because even things as small as walking, running, rolling, or the random items we obtain across the map have gone in directions I personally did not expect, to eventually bring ZA speedrun times down from a grueling 8 hours to a much more manageable 6.5 hours in a matter of weeks. So, in order to figure out what's been going on with the speedrun route and why the strange conclusions we came up with make a lot of sense, I'm going to dive into each version of the developed speedrun route, explain what exactly changed between them, and how the current versions of the speedrun route has excelled the Heracross named boys into the stratosphere of Legends ZA speedruns. Before we talk about the speedrun, I need to show you one of my favorite sponsors from the amazing folks at Red Magic. This right here is the Red Magic Pro 11, an absolute monster of a phone that I cannot speak enough volumes for from someone who's been using one of their phones for more than a year. The Red Magic Pro 11 is such a massive improvement to not only their incredible gaming capabilities, but also taking even higher quality pictures and videos. And as a nice cherry on top, we got ourselves an elusive headphone jack that other phone companies love to get rid of for whatever reason. But I think the biggest highlights for me are the charging speeds, battery life, and the games I can play off of this phone. It took a while to get there, but as a test, I let the phone go all the way down to about 20%, and it took less than an hour to go back to full by charging. And afterwards, I decided to fire up some Pokemon Unite for fun, and despite not playing on a full-blown TV, I had a blast and could see just how much quality something as small as this phone could retain by letting you play some games that you're seeing on screen. Because with the beautiful processing capabilities of the Snapdragon 8 Elite, along with 24 entire gigs of RAM and an incredible resolution and refresh rate that rivals that of an LED HD TV, what else could you possibly ask for? Nice customization? Got that. A really good cooling fan? Got that. Wireless charging? Got that too. If all that sounds amazing to you and you want to discover more about this phone for yourself, check out the link in the description and grab yourself the incredible Red Magic Pro 11 today. To beat Pokemon Legends ZA as fast as possible, you need to have a Pokemon with a fast and powerful enough moveset to clear out hundreds of Pokemon battles. Because the story of the game is centered around those battles and require you to rank up in a battle gauntlet known as the ZA Royale, which is a system where you need to build up enough points to face bosses to go from rank Z to A before beating the game. But in between those ZA Royale boss ranks, there's also things known as Rogue Mega Evolution, which are giant Pokemon boss battles that resemble the difficulty of Dark Souls bosses. And once you've reached rank A, the end of the game feels just as crazy as those Rogue Megas because of the gauntlet of Mega Evolutions they throw at you, along with the battle against the final boss, the entire freaking Lumiose Tower. So, given the variety of things you gotta fight and have to have an answer for, finding a single Pokemon to do it with might seem difficult. But it turns out that everyone's favorite Heracross named Boys does the job really well. For those unfamiliar with Boys the Heracross, it's a hilarious trade Pokemon you are literally required to obtain from a side mission in order to progress the story. And with the power of Boys dual typing, a guaranteed brave nature, the XP bonus from being a trade Pokemon, and a monstrous move pool, it destroys almost every fight in Pokemon Legends ZA with barely any struggle. But the small few Pokemon that it can't handle very well are where a lot of problems lie within the speedrun, which end up requiring solutions outside of just smacking things with Heracross. These particular solutions can be observed when looking at where the ideas for the route started and where they went between versions 1 and 2 of the speedrun node. Version 1 I won't go over into too much detail because these were made to get an idea of the shape of the game's mechanics and story progression and how boys could best face them. So to summarize version 1, we started off our speedrun adventures in Lumiose by picking Totodile, as it seemed like the best starter to get past rank Z and book it straight to Boys, who would carry out fights entirely solo for ranks Y through V. But by the time rank V was reached, we would be required to obtain an Absol in the very first Rogue Mega Evolution raid battle. And since it was a mandatory raid battle and came at a very good level, Absol could be used in unison with Heracross for battles that Boys either struggled with and required a backup fighter, or and sections where it did worse than Absol, like against Mega Skarmory or the Rogue Mega Evolution raid battle against Banette. However, because this was version 1 of the route, the biggest struggles of this route had yet to receive a great answer, which was the Rogue Mega Evolution raid battle against Altaria and Dragonite. The answer to which at the time was Vanillite evolved into a Vanilluxe. I'm not entirely sure how weird this might seem on the surface, but it made a lot of sense for the first up-and-coming routes to use, given that once you reach rank B, you were required to catch and use a Pokemon that knows Ice Beam in order to progress the story by freezing a fountain. And the fastest, easiest one to catch was Vanillite. While this was a somewhat decent answer to both those nasty boss battles, the lack of Mega Evolution barely sped up the fights, as Vanilluxe would need to rely almost entirely on plus moves to speed them up, which unfortunately does a lot less consistent damage and eats up way more Mega Evolution meter than Mega Evolutions do. So it was bound to be replaced eventually by the time version 2 of the notes came out, as we were slowly coming across the sub 7-hour barrier. And it would be exactly on version 2 of the notes where the route started to invest in a lot of the game's features that we now knew more about, like the colorful screw system. For those unaware of what colorful screws are, they are these purple glowing items you've probably seen scattered all over the map that can be traded for a permanent boost to earning extra experience, money, catch rates, mega shards, or improved HP on your player character. And so for a speedrun, boosted experience proved to be the most valuable thing to invest in for Boys and his friends to clear fights much quicker. But unfortunately for Florges, it would require you to invest in an evolution stone to evolve it later. But what it had compared to Pokemon like Vanilluxe is its survivability and power against both Altaria and Dragonite would prove to outweigh the potential of Vanilluxe thanks to its dragon type immunity. However, Florges also didn't get a Mega Evolution, which meant more reliance on slow, ineffective plus moves. But despite that shortcoming, Florges managed to stick around for the next couple of days of speedrunning, leading up to versions 3 through 5 of the route. And while there wouldn't be any more crazy Pokemon changes in between versions 3 through 5, one of the biggest things we found during this time was access to EXP candies in places like restaurants that could be used to bump up levels at an insane rate. However, it seems as though Game Freak had learned from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which had a map filled entirely by large EXP candies that could be used to bump you all the way to level 50 before the very first gym in the game. Because instead of that, we've been limited to medium candies, which give us a humble but effective boost to the level 20s, which I personally think is the perfect amount to not overpower our Pokemon and make every fight a breeze like Scarlet and Violet did. What was also figured out at the time is you could straight up lose to your rival Tawny or Urbane and still progress the game, which made the starter of choice a lot more complicated. Because instead of prepping for your rival fight, the choice of the best starter began to form around two things. The first was getting to Boys as fast as possible, which so far proved to just outright beat Tepig. However, Totodile, while slightly slower than Tepig, provided a free water-type Pokemon to use water moves with for the Z Royale points, or could clear out things like random sludge on the ground, blocking your way while traveling. It also happens to learn and carry the move Screech, which doesn't quite lower defense by 2 stages like older Pokemon games, but instead becomes a longer lasting single stage defense drop, which is an incredibly valuable thing to have in ZA during Rogue Mega Evolution raid battles. So while you could technically outpace Totodile from the very beginning of the game, the cost of not having a reliable water type like Totodile for ZA points or access to things like Screech has so far outweighed the value of Tepig's early game pacing. It'd also be here starting from route version 4 and onward, where we would eventually see things like obtaining less and less screws across the map, using things like Parasong on Absol to breeze through the ridiculous endgame Mega Evolution Gauntlet, before finally figuring out the fastest way to move across the game's overworld. So with that said, let me introduce you to neutral rolling. Neutral rolling is done by tapping the Y button without pressing a single direction forward, which at first didn't seem like the most useful thing, because the biggest and best use of neutral rolling came from moments where the path that we take is just holding a straight line or not climbing roofs or ladders. But it wouldn't take us too long to figure out that you could in fact change direction mid-roll. But if you accidentally hold a direction for too long during the roll, you start to stutter a bit and can lose a bit of time that you took to roll instead of run. So if done correctly, I think this should add up to about 3 to 8 minutes of time save over the course of the entire run. And speaking of time save, the revolution that was brought about by version 6 of the speedrun route started to look as if this might be the definitive version, as we now almost entirely abandon screws, having only picked up 3 for a single player health charm, which actually ended up providing us a way better way to just keep spamming moves on our Pokemon without having to take the time to dodge. Because if you're dodging, you're not actually using moves, which logically is a lot slower. This would also be where we started to embrace Totodile entirely for its value as a water Pokemon, and even found something that could Mega Evolve for both Altaria and Dragonite. While the Rogue Mega Dragonite would still be a bit of a struggle, using Heracross ultimately became the go-to meta with moves like Rock Blast, Swords Dance, and the newest addition Leer to obliterate it while hoping that its flying type moves would miss, making it a high risk, high reward kind of battle. As for Altaria, turns out that Beedrill was the perfect candidate to fly around at lightning speeds to take it out with its Mega Evolution using super effective poison type moves. And the best part about it is that we get access to Mega Beedrill's Mega Stone for free, and it would be using this tech that would finally grace us with a sub 7-hour speedrun time. But what if I told you there was one more singular Pokemon that disintegrated the potential of everything else to help Heracross shine even more than it already does by bypassing every possible resistance you can imagine? And to that, I have a question for you all. Have you ever heard of a move called Forest Curse? I imagine this sounds incredibly made up, but it's actually a real Pokemon move that adds grass typing onto any Pokemon within the radius of the move. And the only Pokemon that can learn it out of 1,000 plus Pokemon is either Phantom or its evolved form Trevenant. So, since Forest Curse can be used to add a grass type weakness to every Pokemon in Legends EA, it makes Heracross's bug and flying type moves that much more valuable. But the single best thing about this move is that when it's used in a Rogue Mega Evolution raid battle, unlike moves like Leer or Swords Dance, Forest Curse lasts the entire battle and will never go away, giving us an absolutely fantastic solution to every single problem Heracross has had up to this point. However, nothing, and I mean nothing, can compare to the final time-saving skip we found in Pokemon Legends EA. We call this Drip Skip. A skip so precise that if you press the wrong button 5 hours into playing the game, you could end up losing time.
I don't know why this part of a trick is this deep into the run.
Because as it turns out, looking good comes at a cost of about 5 seconds.
I did not skip the drip. Probably reset TBH.
And that is pretty much the current state of Pokemon Legends EA Speedrun, with the world record sitting at 6 hours and 37 minutes with plenty more room for optimization. If you want to keep up with that optimization, be sure to subscribe here. And once again, special thanks to everyone who supports me over there on Patreon.